Call it. Heads. Before the world had passed her time of youth, while polity and discipline were weak, the precept eye for eye and tooth for tooth came forth a light, though but as of daybreak, strong as could then be born. A master meek prescribed the spirit fostered by that rule, patience his law, long-suffering his tool, and love the end which all through peace must seek. Hello, and welcome to Storytime with Isto. You have reached chapter 13 of Tarot Tales, a beautiful and an ominous number. I am so pleased to have those of you that are joining me here today. Each week, I tell a little-known fairy tale based on a randomly drawn tarot card. And those of you that were with me last week knew that I was coming in with the Four of Wands this week. Now, this is a beautiful card for a number of different reasons. First of all, I just love the yellow, which is inspiring my outfit for this evening. But there's so many things that you can tell from the actual card itself. So we've got these people throwing up these bouquets in the background. Looks kind of like a Roman celebration, but with a castle in the background. Then we've got this kind of canopy up top, made for celebrations, perhaps a wedding, but it's definitely very celebratory, which is exactly what this card represents. It's this idea of celebration, communion, rejoicing, coming together, being excited, reunions, weddings. Maybe I've already said that, but that is the spirit of this card. It's a really beautiful card. However, we drew it upside down. And as we've learned so far, a reversed card basically means that we're not quite hitting the same vibe that's happening here. And because this is such a joyous card, it's got some pretty negative consequences. So this is the idea that false celebrations, perhaps a family member moving away, some kind of like negative comeuppance as a result of it, feeling jilted, conflict, a death in the family, anything that could ruin a celebration or get in the way of that kind of true communal joy. That's what this card is looking like upside down. So I found just the saddest story that I could find that would fit in the vein of the Four of Wands reversed. But before we get to that, let's talk about our beverages for the week. So I have chosen to draw the Four of Wands kind of covering a corpse because that's the vibe that we've got going on this week. Those of you that drink alcohol may be joining me with a burnt forest this week, which is truly one of my favorite cocktails. It's basically just a Manhattan, but with rosemary, which is one of my favorite herbs. So I'm going to light it here for a minute before I drink it. And I hope that you're enjoying this either at the present or in the future. And then for those of you that don't drink alcohol, we have Chapman, which I found on a Nigerian blog, because that's where our story is from this week, for this idea of Nigerian sangria. I'm not sure how accurate that is, but this is a delightful option for those of you that want something a little milder. So regardless of whether or not you are joining me with a beverage in the present or the future, to you, I say a heartfelt cheers. But it would not be an appropriate cheers if we did not burn down the forest before we took a drink. So there we go, lighting some of the rosemary on fire to get a nice little, oh God, it's so good, smell before we dive in. Ooh, and I don't want that to burn me, so, okay. Leaf in my mouth, delicious. All right. As for our story this week, this is the very first time that I am using a story that I only had a single source from. And I just fell really deeply in love with it. So what I've done is, this is the book that I'm referencing for the story, The Orphan Girl and Other Stories, which is a collection of West African folktales by a man, I believe it's pronounced Buki Ofadile. And I've linked to this person's book in the description below this video. So that will list all of the different places that you could potentially purchase it, as well as a number of other international folktale collections, which I highly recommend. So if you enjoyed today's story, I really recommend you go and check it out. I've adapted today's story directly from one of the very many beautiful stories in this book. All right. Now, before we get to the meat of it all, a small request for all of you. If you were watching this story in the future or in the present, please do like this video and subscribe to my channel on as many accounts as you have available to you. It truly does help me as I continue to try and grow this art project. All right. Chapter 13. Why the Kite Chases Forest Fires. In the beginning, the sunbird and the coucal were the best of friends. They were so close that you never saw one without the other. The sunbird was very clever, small, and a fast-flying bird. He was so small that people would often say that they would not pick out the sunbird for game, though it would certainly be proof of good marksmanship to be able to kill a sunbird amongst the rest. Its long beak is adapted to feed on nectar from long flowers and to eat small insects that frequent pollen. Its high-pitched, shrill sound and beautiful feathers make the sunbird unmistakable, and he knew it too. The coucal, on the other hand, was a rather lazy and sluggish bird. As much heavier bird than his friend, he was more often heard making a mwah, mwah, more like a cow kind of sound, mwah, while walking around the ground than seen flying. In fact, when he had to, he preferred to glide rather than fly, unless absolutely necessary. For a change of positions, he would glide to a tree, hop all the way up to its top branch, and then glide to another. He was not known in the bird kingdom for being very bright. Just one other fun fact about the coucal. So related to the cuckoo, which you may have heard of before, but what I didn't know is that the cuckoo are what is known as brood parasites. So they lay eggs and then have other animals raise their eggs as if they are their own children, so they don't have to worry about any parenting, which sounds like a great trick. But the cuckoo does not do that. Also, the males are the ones that rest and incubate the eggs while the women are out going and grabbing food. So that's what we've got going on with the coucal, all the more sympathetic. All right. As the story goes, there was a famine in the bird kingdom. The only way any bird could get enough to eat was if it owned a flute made of bones. These special flutes were used to serenade worms and hypnotize grasshoppers. The worms would crawl out to listen to the music. The grasshoppers would gaze at the musician's agile fingers, and the birds made a mighty feast of all of them. One day, as they were horsing around, the sunbird dared his friend the coucal to 3 market weeks of fasting in a hollow tree filled with ants. I say I can beat you in a fasting contest for 3 market weeks. I double dare you that you cannot, countered the coucal. All right, so let's pause real quick to talk about what a market week is, because it turns out it's fascinating. So the concept of a market week comes from the Ebo Calendar. So the Ebo Calendar is referring to the Igbo people, which is also an Igbo territory, which is a portion of Nigeria, one of the many cultures that exists there. And the Igbo Calendar itself consists of only 4 days in a week, each day named a specific way, and I found a lot of different contradictory information on that, and pronunciation of Igbo in general. So I have actually linked below the book for today, a a YouTube channel called Learn Ebo, which is where I am referencing any pronunciations I have, and that I would recommend you take a look at if you wanted to get any more information. But the core of it is a market week is only 4 days long, which means that they have only 28 days in every month, meaning that they have 13 months in a year, and then they have one extra day that they tack on to the end of each at the end of the year, which I just think it's just like so fitting, so perfect. The only other things that are worth noting are that we are spending our time. Oh, yeah, you're a little out of sight here. We're spending our time here in Nigeria this week. And so a couple things about Nigeria, lots of different populations, civilizations, empires, kingdoms, and peoples that lived in Nigeria over time. In around the 1400s, when Europeans started moving around and exploring more of the world, there was a lot more tension between various different groups and the Brits. Then the slave trade, and then Nigeria was colonized by the British for a number of years, and Nigerians claimed their independence in 1960. So just a little bit of background about the country in which we are spending our time today. All right, so bringing it back, 3 market weeks, as you may think is 21 days, is actually only 12 days. So that is what this challenge is. All right.
I say I can beat you in a fasting contest for 3 market weeks.
I double dare you that you cannot, countered the coucal. As small as you are, you'll die before the sun goes down the first day.
Ha, okay. During the next 3 market weeks, we shall see who will be the first one to call it quits,
replied the sunbird. So the sunbird led his friend to a hollow tree filled with tailor ants, and took residence in a tree hollow nearby filled with harmless nectar ants. So the thing you need to know about the ants is that tailor ants are actually known to eat small animals. They have a really sharp bite. And nectar ants are this really cool ant that goes around and collects like nectar and pollen in different places. And they eat so much of it that their abdomens swell up, and then they take it back to their colonies and excrete it so that everyone else can eat it. So it's interesting. They're not very harmful. So this is very dastardly on the part of the sunbird. And these also are apparently pretty edible for humans as well. Delicious. While the tailor ants swarmed all over the harmless nectar ants, the sunbird chuckled to himself as he ate the delicious bugs. A market week later, the sunbird called out to his friend to check on him. The sunbird and the coucal had a bet that no one must eat or drink even a bit for 3 market weeks. And in a faded and distressed voice, the coucal responded, The sunbird and the coucal had a bet, and no one must eat or drink even a bit for 3 market weeks. And by the 2nd market week, the bites from the tailor ants, coupled with the starvation, had taken their toll on the poor coucal. He could barely respond to the call of the sunbird. By the middle of the 2nd market week, his response was degenerated to a mere I watched a lot of bird call videos to try and get these sounds right, and I think I'm doing a pretty good job, and I just wish that you could emote in the way that I'm feeling it right now. And by the end of the week, the coucal was dead. By the middle of the 3rd market week, the sunbird was fresh, full, and happy. He knew that his friend could not have survived the punishment for long, but just to be sure, he called on him again. The sunbird and the coucal had a bet that no one must eat or drink even a bit for 3 market weeks. But there was no response. At the end of the 3rd market week, the sunbird left his feasting hollow. He flew to the coucal's nest full of tailor ants and retrieved his bones. He chiseled a beautiful flute out of the coucal's leg bone and blew it as he joyfully flew about. All right, so we're going to take a quick pause to talk about bone flutes. All right, so bone flutes are most interesting in the Paleolithic form because this is one of the earliest indications of music that we have for humanity in general. And there are some flutes that are found next to the oldest Ice Age cave paintings that we know that exist. But the oldest one in existence is one called the Duye Babe, which I am pronouncing, I'm sure, terribly, that was found in Slovenia. And it's at a museum in Slovenia. And it's slated, argued to be around 43,000 years old, which is absolutely incredible. But the thing that I found super interesting about it is that there's a whole bunch of debate over whether or not this actually constitutes a flute. Some archaeologists are like, no, an animal took a bite out of it. But if you look at it, it does kind of look pretty precise. And then there are some archaeological music theorists who are like, oh no, because the holes as they exist on this thing actually look like they're hitting the diatonic scale. And so if that was the case, then it had to have been man-made so that it could produce some kind of lovely little sound. Anyway, so just scholarly debate. Thought it was super fun. That's not what we're dealing with here. Here we have a Kugel's bone ocarina. I am Link. All right. As he was flying, the sunbird came upon Mr. Kite, who is at work hard in his garden. Mr. Kite is a fast and fierce predator, quick to anger and quick to fight. The sunbird started singing for him with his flute. Mr. Kite at work. Mr. Kite at work. The sunbird and the coucal had a bet that no one must eat or drink even a bit for 3 market weeks. The coucal lost and died weak.
Whose bone is that flute made from?
The kite asked the sunbird.
It is made from the bone of a stupid bird,
He replied.
It is the coucal's bone.
May I take a look?
Asked the kite.
No, I know you won't give it back.
Sure I will. I just want to try it.
Okay, but I must hold your wings so you don't fly away with it.
If you hold on to my wings, how am I going to test the flute? I need my wings for balance.
Okay, well, how about I hang on to your legs?
If you do that, how am I going to hold the flute to play?
And I love this idea that they're just like using their talons to just like claw into these, which is just like, how would they do that? Isn't that a funny image?
Here, hang on to my tail feathers instead.
So the sunbird held on to the kite's tail feathers in his beak and handed the flute over to him. And before he knew what had happened, the kite darted free from the sunbird's grip, leaving his tail feathers in a flurry behind him. The kite flew home to his mother, who he handed the flute to for safekeeping. Mama Kite was so old that she could barely see her son, let alone the flute.
What type of food did you bring home for your mother today?
She asked.
A rabbit?
No food, Mother, not yet, but a beautiful flute. Please, guard it with your life, he told her, as she felt and admired the gorgeous flute. Do not give it to anyone until I come back for it.
All right, my son. Run along and complete your work, and bring me back a tasty dinner.
The kite flew back to his garden, feeling proud of his trick on the sunbird and of his lovely new prize. But what he didn't realize is that the sunbird had followed the trail of feathers he left in his wake back to the home of his mother. The sunbird had overheard the conversation with his mother and come up with a way to get his flute back. He went to the lake and dipped his feet in thick and sticky mud until his feet grew heavy. He then rolled around in mud and leaves until his size had magnified. Satisfied with his makeup, He flew back to Mother Kite.
Mother, may I have the flute back?
The sunbird asked, trying his best to disguise his voice for the elderly Mrs. Kite.
What food have you brought home? She asked. A squirrel?
No,
replied the sunbird.
A chipmunk?
No.
Come on, tell me, and don't tease your mother like that.
Give me the flute, and I'll give you your meal,
promised the sunbird. So Mother Kite handed him the flute. The sunbird burst into uncontrollable laughter.
I have brought you mud to dine upon. Eat your meal,
he cried, still laughing as he knocked the mud off his feet, shook off the leaves, and flew away with the flute in safety. Mother Kite burst into tears when she realized what she had done. She felt terrible for having failed to keep her promise. How could she let down her son in such a way? She waited till eventually Mr. Kite came back home and found his mother without his prize.
Mother, what happened?
He screeched. His mother started weeping and tried through broken sobs to explain what had happened. But Mr. Kite, filled with anger, before she could get a word out, he snapped her neck with his beak and pecked out her heart. He then took her body and dumped it in a forest fire. He circled the fire with a mighty wrath, darting around to prey on the animals running from the flames. He glutted himself until his belly was full and his anger subsided. It was only when he rested that he realized the gravity of his actions.
Oh, what have I done?
He asked himself.
I lost all my tail feathers and now my mother, all because of a lousy flute I made out of a coucal's bone.
In order to atone for his shame and bad temper, he went on a self-imposed exile. He was gone from one dry season to another, about a year. Within this time, his tail feathers grew back completely. He also had enough time to mourn his mother and face the world anew. All right, so our final vocab word for this week is all about mourning. So I want to talk to you a little bit about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And you may know that name because she is the person that invented the concept, the theory of the 5 stages of grief. So we're talking about Kite mourning his mother, and that got me really interested, and I fell down a rabbit hole. And so I wanted to represent this a little bit. But before we dive into the actual 5 stages of grief, I want to tell you a little bit about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. So she was a Swiss American, and in 1969, she published a book called On Death and Dying, in which she published this concept of these 5 stages. And she got this idea specifically when she was visiting one of the camps from the Holocaust, and she saw that there were butterflies drawn on the inside of these containment camps. And she found that so beautiful that really propelled her career forward to study this idea of grief and resiliency in general. So the concept, if you're not familiar with it, with a morale axis over here on the right and a time axis down here at the bottom, is this idea of denial, first and foremost. So, it's not real. Followed by anger, trying to figure out why and blaming others. Dipping down on depression here at the base, moving on up to bargaining, which I spent a lot of time learning about that as well. It's this idea of like trying to figure out how you can avoid having to deal with the concept of it all. I don't know. I could spend a lot more time on it. And then finally, you end up in acceptance. So this is fine and good. But I also read a lot of criticism about this in terms of like modern thoughts on resiliency and grief in general. And so the kind of more modern idea of how we deal with grief is this idea of responding to negative actions either through anger or going numb and blaming other people, or getting upset and then coping and trying to find a way to get yourself to a place of coping so that you can focus on your own ability to have autonomy, and agency in a situation. And that skill is called resiliency. It's really fascinating. You could spend a lot of time working about it. Final thing I'll say on this is that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, even if she was wrong about this, was a badass woman. She was a big proponent of the hospice movement, and she was a fierce advocate for mental health rights when she was working just around the corner at the Manhattan State Hospital on Ward's Island for those with schizophrenia because they were not treated under very good conditions. So remember that name and go do a nice little Wikipedia deep dive. All you need to know is this resilient little kite thinks that he's over his mother's death. When he returned, the dry season was in full force. The forest fires burned more than ever. On seeing the forest, the image of the death of his mother and his shame came back to him in a sudden flash. He started circling the fires in a fury, hoping to find his mother's body. "If only I can find her," he cried. "I would hug her and tell her how much I love her. I really didn't mean to hurt you, Mother. Please forgive me." Kite searched all over the fires in vain, diving occasionally when he saw something that looked like his mother, but it was never her. And eventually the fire died down. Mr. Kite rested and wept for what he had done. But the next time he saw a forest fire, and every time thereafter, he was once again so overcome with the images from his past and an urge to find her body and make everything okay, that to this day, the kite still chases forest fires, gliding around in search of his mother, hoping that he can tell her how sorry he is and how much he loves her. The end. Isn't that a sad story? I think it's so beautiful, but so tragic. There's so many reasons why I picked this for the Four of Wands reversed. It's like an anti-celebration. We've got death of a family. We've also got this death of a friendship at the beginning. And I love some like spicy animal politics, which I feel like was really present throughout all of this. So I don't know. My gratitude for this week, as I was thinking about all of this, goes to elder care workers. I spent a lot of time with my grandparents when they were near the end of their life, and they had a lot of people that cared for them. Hospice workers, elder care workers, what an incredible emotional burden and a gift to the rest of humanity, to the people you care for, and to those that love them. So, generic, thank you. As for next week, we have another Royal Cups card. We are dealing with the King of Cups, but I did draw it reversed. So we're going to be getting into both what it means upright, but we're going to focus on a story that goes upside down. And I found that story. It is a delight. It is bonkers. And we are headed to Japan next week. So I hope you can join me for that. And with that, may you be happy. May you be healthy. May you treat yourself with love and respect. May you continue to grow and find the strength to persevere through the painful parts of growth. May you find inspiration all around you, and may you find peace. Until next week, thank you for joining me this week. Goodbye, y'all.